Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited today for us to come together and talk about how you want to be remembered. My guest today is Minister Joe Walker, and he is a old friend of mine. We worked together doing diversity trainings. I'm not going to say how long ago, but he is also a minister of pastoral care. And we're just going to have a conversation. So, Joe, welcome to our talk today.
Gloria, it's so good to see you. It's so good to be back in touch.
Yeah, it is wonderful to see you as well. So what you've been doing lately? What's been going on in your life lately?
Well, for the last several years, I've been serving in pastoral care. So that's mostly working with folks who are sick or folks who are shut-ins with the elderly. We've been advocating for changes in healthcare and nursing home policies and supporting the first line folks, so the people who work in nursing homes and nurses who work in hospitals. I've been doing all those kinds of things. And then over the last couple of years, I've been doing some work with the green burial movement. I've been trying to
Oh.
educate people about options there to be more environmentally responsible with our last choice.
Right, right. Well, we're going to get to talk a little bit around loving choices that we make in our life today and how do we want to be remembered. And so tell us a little bit about what that would look like when we talk about that. I know we had mentioned a story or two of people that we remember in our life. So I wanted you to just kind of share a story around that.
I talk with individuals and families all the time. I do lots of talks on this. And I suggest that people think in advance about how they want to be remembered. I do that for a couple of reasons. That, some people say, oh, well, I don't, that's an ego thing. I said, your life has lessons that you have learned.
Yes.
Some things have gone, some of those choices have been successful or worked out a little better, and some of them not so much. But
True.
there are we've all got that, right?
Yeah, you're so right. We all have something that didn't work out just like we wanted.
So there are lessons in your life, and it's valuable for you to look back on those and reflect. And it's valuable for you to share those with those who are around you. That may be family, that may be friends, that may be people at church or elsewhere. And they're not in an egocentric way, but just here's something I learned. And it's important for especially our younger generations to see that, a lot of times they'll see, like, I'm a grandpa now, they'll see grandpa as this older guy, in this particular context, from this particular perspective. Well, this older guy, once upon a time, was a teenager,
I know about that.
yeah.
I know about that. Yeah. And I have grandkids as well. And sometimes, they think that my age is like I'm old. Well, I don't feel old, but however, they don't realize that I was once a teenager as well, right? So I get that.
And our choices impacted their lives. I mean, they are in a particular situation or place because of our choices. And I think it's been interesting. We're in history all the time, and I think right now we're talking about the pandemic and so many complicated things in terms of our nation and our world. But we're always in history. People have always been in history, and history impacts. Sometimes it limits or directs our choices, but also the way that we respond to history, that we act in history. We also change the world. There was a lady that I had the honor of officiating her funeral a few years ago. She lived to 102. And we had a conversation. I was having a conversation with her grandchildren, who were now at that point all out of college. And the first things they came up with was, well, mom lived in the college town we all went to, and so we were able to grandma, so we were able to stay with her, and she made nice cookies and those kinds of surface first responses.
Yes.
And I pressed him. I said, well, tell me about really who she was, though. Tell me about some old stories that she told you. And for instance, during the Second World War, her husband was in the war and he was away, and she was a school teacher. And the war ends, and he comes home. And Monday morning, she goes into her classroom, and there's a man sitting at the teacher's desk. And she says, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, I'm the new teacher in this class." And she said, "Oh, no, you're not." And so she went down to the principal's office, and long story short, he said, "Well, your husband's home, and wives stay home. So,
Oh, wow.
I figured you didn't need the job anymore."
Wow.
And she pushed back, and she got the job back, etc.
Yeah.
And I said, when we think about changes in the world and how those happen, a lot of times those happen one person standing up at a time and saying something that needs to be said and advocating right then and there. So yes, history impacts us, but we impact history too.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of inspiring stories that a young person can absorb and take in and say, well, when something like that comes along for me, what am I going to do? What's going to be my response? And how
Right.
can I model after that real life hero in my life?
Yes, one of the things that comes to mind for me is when I think about my mom. She passed away a few years ago, and people always say, "Well, your mom was a great cook." People always think about her in terms of that, but she was more than that. And her story, even her life story, as an adult, I could really appreciate all the choices she made to get me where I'm at today. And so you're so right that we're more than just a, a year. We were born this year and we died this year. We really have life all in between, and that life is significant for all of us in some way. And so whatever those life choices are, like the sacrifices my mom made because of what she gave up in order for me to become who I've become. I'm honored. I honor her in that. So you're right. The life choices she made in her life actually influenced what happens in my life. And that's going to happen with our children and our grandchildren too. It's a continuation of that. So making loving life choices is really a part of that legacy, don't you think?
I do, making loving life choices and reflecting on our choices, and what shaped your choices. Again, what stories did you hear when you were young, that modeled
Yeah.
for you? Were there books? Were there movies? Were there things like that you said, oh, there's a maxim, a life quote that I want to live out in my life. For some people that's religion. So how do we convey to younger people
Mhm.
those choices, and how do we, as we said a moment ago, not everything works out like intended it to. And so how do we help our young people see how we learn from choices that weren't so loving,
Right, right.
and how do we honor and respect those lessons too?
One of the thoughts that just came to me around that is when we don't make such loving choices, meaning that we take a detour from what might have been a better choice, those things also play into who we are becoming. And it teaches us to, I think for me, like some of the mistakes I feel that I made in my life, as I look back, I can share those things with my grandchildren, my daughters, and other people as well, to let them know that we're not perfect beings, right? So no matter how well we think we can plan it out, life takes its own course many times, and that we have to flow with it, is what I call it. I flow with it, not fret about it, but flow with whatever comes into my life, and embrace that as part of the growth process for my own life. And I think a lot of young people need to hear those stories that are what we might consider failures or mistakes, because they can feel more comfortable about taking the risk, and know that no one is perfect, and we don't want to paint that picture anyway, that we have it all together, that we made all the right choices, that kind of thought.
there's humility in there, learning to forgive and to accept forgiveness. So yes, it's much more fun to share the things that went well, uh,
Yeah.
but the reflection and the growth points on the things that didn't, the regrets, those are important too. I say, when I'm talking to groups, when I'm working with families, I say, how are you going to record some of that in some way, so that when we have to write your obituary, which we have to do for everybody at some point. I say that all the time, and people go, "Oh, yeah." But when we have to write that obituary, what words, what phrases, again, what scripture quotes or maxims or whatever, what stories do you want them to remember and to be able to build from, and to take into their own life? If I could, I'd say one of the things that I think is really challenging for us right now is that we can't have the kind of memorial services or celebration of life or funeral or whatever you want to call that ritual opportunity that we have had, because as we're taking
COVID.
this,
Yeah, it's changed how we do everything, especially with the fact that the rituals have great meaning in many of our cultures of how we say goodbye, and not being able to. I know for African Americans, having a homegoing service is what we call funeral services for the most part.
Mhm.
And to be able to say that goodbye, and not being able to do that now, and to have the repast where we come together and we can hug and support, and we eat together and we laugh together and we share stories of the love that we had with our family member or loved one. And so this has changed the dynamics of so much. This pandemic has changed that for many people in terms of how do we remember in a way that's loving and comforting for us.
Yes, and that comfort, the ritual, whatever that is in a particular tradition or culture, but the rituals are important, passed down again from generation to generation. The intergenerational support, the generations seeing each other. Families tend to be scattered out all over the country now. The opportunity, the necessity to come together and be together and support one another. That's important to see that this person was loved outside of just your family. So other friends, church, community, etc. And it's also really important, that those moments when we gather for funerals or whatever you call them are important, because it pushes back. Our culture's had a really hard time for generations now dealing with death. And death is natural. It's beautiful. Nothing steals away our love and our memories. And we believe different things about what happens, after life, after this life. But the harsh reality is that death does steal that physical presence,
Yeah.
and we need to grapple with that to be healthy, to have healthy grief and mourning, and to not suppress that. And so those rituals help. It's not funny, haha, but it's funny to think about. People say all the time, "Well, I don't want to come to a funeral. I might cry."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of the points.
Right.
I
It allows you to get the emotion out, and it's acceptable. It's acceptable whether you do it in public or do it alone. It's real important when you're dealing with grief to express that grief, and however that is for you to do
yeah,
that. And
yeah.
yes, we won't go into that conversation because that will take us away from the loving memories. But I know that there was a little exercise we were going to share with everyone to kind of think about loving life choices in their lives. And do you have those questions, or do I need to kind of look at those?
Well, I would suggest a couple of things. I'd invite people to take out a piece of paper and a pen and write down 3 words or phrases that they would hope someone would use, when they were speaking about that person after their death. So, and there again, beyond the fact that they were a great cook or could golf or whatever that might be, what are three really significant words or phrases that you would want someone to use? And by the way, that's also a time to check and say, am I actually doing that? Would people think that about me? So that's an opportunity there too. But and then to be able to share that, put that in wherever your papers are, because that was an aspiration that you had. And then another thing, kind of the next step on that is, can you think of a particular story in your life where you exhibited those characteristics or those virtues, those behaviors? Because I think it's helpful to have a particular story, like the one I told about the teacher all those years ago in the Second World War. Is there a story that can kind of be representative? And then a lot of times, if you have a story, then that people will say, oh well, and there was this other time, and then this other time. But that will be an important reflection for you in terms of your own loving choices. It will also help, and this is a huge help. I want to stress that whoever has to make your final arrangement, and somebody's going to make your final arrangements, if you have left them some notes, that's a loving choice, because to have to start from scratch when you're in the middle of grief and all those other decisions, that's really hard. So it's a loving choice to leave them some, here's some songs I like, here's some quotes I like, here's some notes.
Yes. Well, thank you. This has been really wonderful. It's been great. Thank you for sharing and talking with me about this. I really appreciate you for taking time to meet with me. We haven't seen each other in many years, but it's really great to see your face, and I'm really thankful. So thanks, Joe.
Good to be back together. Blessing.
God bless you. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope that you got that piece of paper out and that you wrote down 3 phrases or words that describe who you are, that you could leave a story for your life, for the people that love you. And I just really appreciate you being a part of this community. Again, topics that you're interested in, please share those with me. Share those with Tracy and Jamar. We're wanting to hear from you so that we can share the kinds of things and talk about the kinds of things that are important to you, the issues pertaining to love, loss, and life itself. God bless you all and have a wonderful week.